Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of Star Trek, the original series. In this video, I will review every episode of Star Trek, the original series. Season 2 review of Star Trek, the original series. You ever notice, this is what I noticed, I'm sorry, I did my Kirk impersonation last time, but do you ever notice, I noticed this when I was watching Season 2 in particular, how he'll pause, and like in the middle of doing something, and it looked like he's about to talk, and just go, the original series, and then blurted it out. I was getting a bit annoyed. It's like in the Tribbles, he was like, I want two things. First, find Cyrano Jones, and second, close that door. Anyway, sorry. So in this video, I will cover every episode of Season 2 of Star Trek, the original series. This video is part of a series of videos where I cover every single episode of Star Trek, the original series, one season at a time. So Season 2. Now, I talked before in my Season 1 review that Season 1 is clearly the best season of the show, and I've heard opinions lately that was trying to say it was a matter of fact, like everyone agreed that Season 2 was the best season of the show, and I'm like, but I thought, as a matter of fact, everyone agreed Season 1 was the best season of the show. Like, that surprised me to hear that. And watching this again, I am actually reaffirmed that Season 1 is clearly the better season than Season 2. Not that Season 1 is perfect. It's got Mud's Women, Charlie X, like boring episodes like freaking Dagger in the Mind, and when you go woo woo woo, and more forgettable episodes like What Are Little Girls Made Of, stupid episodes like Miri. So it's not a perfect season, but it is nowhere near as bad. Well, I wouldn't say near as bad, maybe near as bad, but it's definitely not as bad as Season 2. Now, Season 2 has some classics, for sure. It's got Doomsday Machine, Amok Time, Mirror. I was going to say Tribbles, but that's overrated. What else? I don't know. There's some good ones in Season 2 for sure. But I don't know. Well, Journey to the Babel, that's pretty good. But I would say overall, Season 2 is more of a mixed bag for me, and there's a lot of worse. There's a lot of terrible episodes. and I think like the majority of episodes in Season 2 I gave a negative review to that is, or negative rating, that is a 5 or less. Which was not the case for Season 1. Now, I also mentioned, like, when I was growing up, I actually preferred Season 3 over Season 2. Season 2 was actually my least favorite season of the show. I don't know how I'll feel about that, because I don't know. I think I was just held Season 3 up more because it was darker, and it was like, the episodes were less talked about, so I hadn't really heard much about them, so I felt they were underrated. But I remember there being a lot of terrible stuff in Season 3 as well as, and The Children Shall Lead, and god damn it, Eliana Troyas and stuff like that. So, we'll see how I feel when I get to Season 3. If I still have maybe I'll still have the opinion that I feel Season 3 is better than Season 2. I don't know. We'll see, because Season 2 they had a lot of episodes that felt like a Western to me, but it also had a lot of episodes that they went to a planet and the planet was just a different part of Earth's history. It's like Chicago gangsters, or Nazis, or Romans, and or some like post-apocalyptic version of America versus communism, and I find that stuff really stupid. I'm sorry. And this is what really drags Season 2 down. a lot for me. In fact, in season 1, there were 3 episodes I gave a 10 out of 10 to: Balance of Terror, Sitting on the Edge of Forever, and Taste of Armageddon. In season 2, there are exactly 0 episodes I give a 10 out of 10 to. Now, there are 4 I give a 9 out of 10, which I'll get to shortly. But none I give a 10 out of 10. And also in season 1, I think I gave 1 or 2 episodes of 1. No, I think Muslim was the only episode I gave a 1 to. In this season, I gave 3 episodes of 1. And a lot more episodes got 2s and 3s than season 1 did. So, yeah, I honestly think that season 2 is definitely a poor season. Season 1 it may in fact be my least favorite season, because as terrible as season 3 is, and they tried to appeal to women and romance and all that bullshit. Well, yeah, it had it still didn't portray women in a very positive way, but none of the seasons do. But they tried to rely on the romance of the week too much, which is a really tired trope. So maybe I will think season 3, but I honestly think it's worse to have the Western or the freaking different. You just go to a planet or just another part of Earth's history. That bothers me a lot more. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive into season 2. Let's start with... before I dive, gotta say, if you saw my season 1 review, you know I reviewed the episodes in order of production order rather than air date. And I decided to keep that up for season 2, even though it's not as necessary. It's not as, noteworthy, because in season 1, if you watch an air date and production order, everything's out of whack and it doesn't make sense. I think production order is the only way that makes sense to watch season 1. Whereas in season 2, it doesn't really matter. In fact, I went into season 2 foolishly thinking, is the production order is pretty much the same thing as air date for season 2, but it's not. It's still completely and utterly different. However, you can't tell as well. It doesn't really make a difference in the watching. But for consistency's sake, I decided to stick with production order. So if the order I'm doing seems a bit out of whack compared to how it appears on your Netflix or Paramount Plus subscription, it's because I'm not doing the air date like they do, and I still think they shouldn't do air date. But anyway, so we'll start with the first episode in production order, and that is Cat's Paw. Now, this is actually the only episode that makes a difference that it's in production order, because we get to see Chekhov with his monkey's haircut, and this is the only episode he had it in, and they cut it, or it's a wig that he was wearing, and they stopped making him wear the wig because they wanted him to look like, I think David Jones is his name from the Monkees. I don't even remember that show really, because it was so popular, and they wanted to Chekhov to appeal to the young girls, which is why. And then this will, even though they got rid of the hairdo, it carries on to the episode The Apple, but I'll get to that in a short time. Anyway, Cat's Paw is one of the episodes I aforementioned, and I gave a 1 to because this episode is terrible. I think I actually had this in my top 5 worst episodes of the original series last time I did a top 5 worst. And I would say the very high chance it may make that list again. It's trying to be like a Halloween themed episode. In fact, that's why this is the first episode they made, but they didn't air it until much later because they wanted to air it for Halloween. Because it was a Halloween themed episode where they had these witches' heads were floating around going, Captain Kirk, Captain Kirk, we curse you. And there was a giant cat, which, 60s, but still, obviously they just filmed the cat and superimposed it over Kirk, and you can tell it's really doesn't work. A giant cat going and what else do they have? They have a skeleton like in a dungeon, and have witches and wizards and warlocks and sorcerers and and Scotty and Sulu. I think it's Sulu. They're like brainwashed zombies and going dun 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 dun. It is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. This, I think, to be fair, maybe is more common in the sixth season. Maybe this is one of the episodes that really, really didn't age well. But it's absolutely ridiculous. And it doesn't make sense. Like, I tried to, like, put all the cheesiness and this shit that they were trying to do a Halloween episode aside. Like, and she does, like, voodoo where she has, like, a necklace of the Enterprise and she puts it over a candle and the Enterprise starts burning up. We're so stupid. Anyway, I try to put all this aside and focus on the plot, and because I want to judge this fairly and really analyze it, and there really is no plot. I mean, it's all about the Halloween pomp. The plot is there's two aliens who come from another galaxy or whatever, another planet, and they colonize this planet and they make all these illusions and they lure the Enterprise in so that they can have... I can't even remember why. It was such a weak explanation. And they get found out and deceived by Kirk, and they turn out to be just like, these bubbling little puppets. They go and die. The plot sucked. There was no plot, and all the exterior and all the theme of it was just so dumb. And he had that dude DeSalle, I think his name was, saying, "I'll bet you credits to Navy beans." That did not age well. I'm sure that didn't seem as stupid as... I remember watching that for the first time when I was a teenager, and me and my sister would crack the hell up. We were like laughing forever. He had credits to Navy beans. We're like, what the fuck? Credits to Navy beans? Like, this sounds like the most dorky thing to say. Anyway, again, it's probably just didn't age well. But this episode's horrible. Horrible. It's got no redeeming values. Anyway, let me go ahead and get into the next episode, which is Metamorphosis. Actually kind of like this episode. I've heard other people trash it, talk shit about it. This is Zephyr Cochrane. He looks very different than when James Cromwell played him in First Contact. I mean, totally different character. He's like just I'm Zephyr Cochrane. Hey, how's it going? Oh, I created Warp Drive. Well, he's not like the drunken loser that we saw in First Contact. You could say, well, this is because he de-aged and he's younger and he's more vitalized and he wasn't always the curmudgeon that we saw in First Contact. To which I say, it just doesn't match up. Anyway, who cares? So, I think this episode's okay. I remember liking it more when I was younger, and I watched it again. It was kind of boring, to be honest, because Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are in a shuttlecraft that crashes on this asteroid or whatever, and they're stranded. And they meet Zephyr Cochrane, and finds out that he's been there for hundreds of years, and that this alien there they call the companion keeps him young, and that they brought Kirk in there. There's also some commissioner woman who is very the abstinent bureaucrat and just being a curmudgeon for no good reason, who's complaining about everything, and she's dying from a disease, and because they need to get back to the Enterprise to cure her, so they're really freaked out about that. And there's this alien called the Companion that communes with Cochrane, and they find out that the alien's actually in love with Cochrane, and they don't know what to do about it, and blah blah blah. So eventually, and the commissioner's about to die, so the alien, the Companion, merges with the commissioner and become the same person. They decide to stay there with Cochran because the commissioner always wanted to love someone, never experienced love, and so joining the aliens, she knows what it means to love someone, so she wants to stay in love because all women should give up their diplomatic careers just to get married and stay with some dude. I'm not saying that's unfair to the episode, but really maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. It was okay. It was kind of boring, as I said, kind of boring at times, but it was kind of touching, I guess, when the Zephyr Cochran found true love and they had to have the kind of relationship with the companion as a human being, while at the same time it's also the commissioner gets to experience love. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of get it, I guess. Anyway, let's get to the next episode, which is Friday's Child. Now, this is, honestly, I always get this episode confused with A Private Little War in my mind. This is the ones that are very Westerns-like, and also this, trying to be like Vietnam or whatever. But I always see it more as a Western, particularly this episode, which has this tribe that very closely resemble Native Americans. And there's a Klingon there who acts more like a Ferengi, and the interaction, I hate the Klingons in season 2. They only appeared once in season 1, and to my knowledge, they only appeared once in season 3. Although they appeared twice, but let's forget about Alejandro Troyes. Let's just focus on Day of the Dove. And I like them better in season 3. So, in their one appearance in season 1 and one of their appearances in season 3, I think those are the Klingons of the original series that worked for me. The ones in season 2 were more like Ferengi. Especially this guy. He's like, oh, I'm the Klingon. And you know how I'm so I couldn't. Alright, so in season 1, the way they kept referring to Vulcans as Vulcanians, and the Vulcan language is Vulcanian. And I think that started to grate on my nerves, and eventually, of course, season 2, they finally, solidified that. Towards the end of season 1 as well, they solidified it as Vulcan. But in this episode, they have so many different ways to pronounce Klingon. The Klingons, I like the way Sulu says it the best, the Klingons. And there's the Klingons, and I think even the Klingon refers to himself as a Klingon. The Klingons. I don't know. That's annoying. Pick one! Anyway, so... yeah, and they act like Ferengis, and there's this woman who is the chieftain's wife, and the chieftain gets killed, and so she wants to die, but McCoy spirits her off away because she's pregnant and tries to give her birth, and McCoy, when he's trying to, examine her, she asks him not to touch him, and he refuses, and he touches her anyway, and so she smacks him, and he continues to touch her, and then she smacks him again, and then so he smacks her because he really needs to touch her. Now, all right, now I'm skipping over the context that he's a doctor and he's medically examining her. He's not groping her or anything, but still, I don't know. If a woman says, "Don't touch me," and your response is to smack her and touch her anyway, I don't know if the medical context really helps. Honestly, I mean, even if he's doing it to save her life, that's not really what you do. But of course, in this episode, they try to make it cutesy, and she respects him more, and only McCoy can touch me. Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't there for it, and as I said, this episode, and the same with the Private Little War. That's why I always get them confused because they blur, because they're not memorable. It's memory erasure episodes where they're just on a planet and some Western shit happens and there's a Klingon there and some bullshit happens I don't really care about. I think that this episode was actually well liked, and a lot of people really liked this episode to my recollection when I was growing up, and I was like, why? It's boring, it's stupid, I don't like it. Anyway, we'll get to the next episode. which is Who Mourns for Adonis. This is when the very realistic episode of the original series where a giant hand flies into space and grabs the I love there's this meme, by the way, that I absolutely love. The show like Discovery and people saying, "Oh my god, I can't believe New Trek is so stupid and it doesn't make any sense. It's so unscientific. How can people watch this crap?" And then underneath it said Old Trek and it showed a picture of a giant hand holding the Enterprise. Oh yeah, I love that meme. Anyway, I think I liked this episode when I was a teenager. But I just find it too ridiculous and stupid now. Especially not just the giant hand, but the Apollo floating. Like, I'm a god, you will kneel before me and worship me and gather leaves and blah, 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 blah. And then, and, you know, obviously they fight back. And after they manage to defeat him, he's like, "Oh, why did you do this to me? Oh, poor little me." I'm like, stop playing, you fucking asshole. You were like, captured these people, holding them against their will, saying that they could never leave, and you're throwing lightning bolts at them because they didn't do exactly what you wanted to do. And then you're all like, "Oh, why are you being so mean to me?" Wants to defeat you. Fuck that guy. Sorry. So, I don't know. I didn't really care for this episode either. So, let's get into the next episode, which is Amok Time. Finally, we're going to get into a good episode. This is one of the episodes I mentioned that's a classic that I really like. You know, I didn't really like this episode that much when I was a kid. And because I think I appreciate it a lot more now, because what I like about it is the style of it and just the quality of the way it's shot and the way that I think it's one of the better acted. Like I watching this episode, like I feel like there's like an uptick in quality. Maybe it might be because I'm watching a remastered version. I think maybe they actually pay more attention to the fan favorite episodes and like do more to touch it up. I don't know. I could be wrong about that, but even the quality in acting and also like the way that it's shot with, it feels like good 60s camp rather than cheesy 60s camp, which is most of the original series, but it feels like a good sort of psychedelic, particularly like the fight between Kirk and Spock. Like I love the way it's shot and the way it's edited, because Spock is like in this crazy fever, and they kind of put you in this perspective where they do like crazy, they cut to like crazy angles and lens of like the Vulcan sitting there shaking that little things, and they had that, of course, the classic dun 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 dun, which I believe was first introduced in this episode, and I think it was one of the definitely the best use of it. And so I absolutely love that. Like, it's stylistically, it's one of my favorite episodes of the original series. And it's got one of my favorite moments that I remember, I quote to myself all the time when wanting to be alone and wanting some solitude, and someone yells at me or calls me or wants me to do something or chore or some other bit of life that I just want to be left alone. I just want to relax. So I always think of that moment where Spock was like, in the heat of things, and Uhura calls him like, "Mr. Spock, to the bridge," and he like goes, "Leave me alone," and like smashes his computer, like, "Leave me alone." That's what I always feel like doing at that time. Anyway, so that always goes. That's something I always think about. Such a Star Trek nerd, I know. But yeah, and it's really interesting to see Vulcan and have the the dynamic between Kirk and Spock fighting, and sort of. I don't know. I think the lead up to this one, Spock was like going crazy and not wanting to admit what was going on. He was being a dick to everyone until they realized that they needed to help him. Like, that was really interesting stuff. However, I do have a lot of nits to pick with this episode, which is why I didn't reach that 10, as I was saying. First of all, I find it hard to believe that the Federation never heard of um, Pungfar before, or the Starfleet's never heard of it. That they're completely like, I don't buy that. Like in Enterprise, we saw they freaking heard of it. Everyone knew what Pungfar was, but that's of course because the viewership knew. And then when this episode aired, the viewership didn't know, and that's the real reason. But so in the universe, it makes no sense that they wouldn't know. Secondly, it doesn't make any sense that Spock would wait this long and not actually like say that his life's in danger. Oh, sure, this is a private thing, and he's embarrassed by it, but he's gonna die. So you figure. So I don't buy that he would just rather just let himself die than explain what's going on. And he keeps hiding from McCoy's examination. And McCoy is the one who like convinces Kirk that Spock is about to die. Like, but he had to do that against his will. Like, I don't buy that. That doesn't make any sense. And also, I don't know. It doesn't seem. It seems like this is a weird. They established the Vulcans as being very sort of for ceremonies and traditions and stuff, and being almost tribal-like in their ceremonies, which to me doesn't actually fit with what's been established as the Vulcans as a very logical race. Like these kind of like ceremonies that they do where they have like they have Vulcans sitting there going ringing this thing and go it seems very illogical to me. So I don't know, and of course this is sort of steeped in canon or lore now. So a lot of people, what are you talking about, Mark? Vulcans of course are like this because it's been well established by now. But I think looking at it from like a fresh perspective, like I don't think this matches with what Vulcans, how they should be behaving. Definitely don't think they should have a fight to the death. That's very illogical to me. And arranged marriages like this, and there's no way out of, rather than having to choose someone to kill people. Also, the more specific nitpick is the fact that they said Kirk, because that chick who didn't want to marry Spock was like, I choose Kirk as my champion, and they're like, do you want to be the champion? While failing to tell him that it's a fight to the death. So Kirk's like, yeah, sure, because I just win Spock, or he wins me, and that's all good, and everything's over. And then once it's too late, they're like, oh yeah, by the way, this is a fight to the death. That I 100% don't buy. Also, that was a dick move on T'Pol's part. She's like, oh, well, you can't back out now. It's a fight to death. It's like, why the fuck did you not tell me this before? Maybe I wouldn't have actually chose to fight my best friend to the death if I knew it was a fight to the death. I don't know. Anyway. So yeah, I got my nits to fix with this episode, but I still love it. I still appreciate the quality for it. Anyway, let me go ahead and jump over to the next episode, which is the Doomsday Machine. Now, this is an episode I also come to appreciate more and more. Actually, I did a review for this a couple years ago. More specifically, I appreciate the special edition version that they did in the early 2000s, where they had like digital video game graphic rather than the little model on the string that they had in the 60s. So it's definitely an upgrade. And I honestly, and I think I noticed it way more in season 2 than I did in season 1. I think they have a lot more external ship shots, or special ship-to-ship battles and stuff. So I think it makes a lot bigger difference in season 2. And this episode in particular, like, it makes a lot more sense to me, rather than it being like a honeycomb dressed up as a thing going do 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 do. And they actually have like you can see the ship battles, and they make a lot more sense. That makes a lot more. So it made me appreciate this episode a lot more. Also, I really love the music, of course, which they brought it back in a couple episodes later on. I think they were not so good episodes. And I was like, yeah, you're trying to be like Doomsday Machine and you fail. But the way the music was used in this episode was really intense, amazing. It's very blaring too. I love how when Decker sacrifices himself, the music gets louder until you just have a cacophony of horns just blaring on as he dies. Like, I thought that was cool. Like, I think this is noted for its music, and it won some awards for it. And you get the classic line from Scotty. It's like, "Oh, blow, she'll blow. I've given her all she's got," or whatever it is. That all works for me. Although I think the way that Commodore Decker, I think I complained about this in my review for this episode, that Spock should have been, or McCoy should have been able to relieve him of duty immediately and demand that he go to a medical exam immediately, rather than, because Spock was like, "Oh, you can't," because Spock brought out the possibility, but McCoy's like, "Yeah, I'll relieve him right now," and Spock's like, "Well, you're going to be asked to certify that with an exam, which you have not done," and he was like, "Damn, you're right." No, bullshit. They could, as the doctor, he could even overrule even the Commodore and order him to do that exam immediately, and then deem him fit to command, but of course that wouldn't fit the plot of the episode. And plus, I think Decker is being, I know he's suffering from PTSD, but he's being completely obtuse and just wanting to fire, let's attack this thing, even though it's very obvious you're just going to get the ship destroyed. Like, so that was a bit annoying as well, but I did love that he, in the end, sacrificed himself to show the way, to show how to actually destroy it, and that Kirk used that. And it was very, very intense when Kirk was on that ship that was about to be destroyed, and the transporters wouldn't work. Like, that was a gimmick that actually really worked for me. So I did appreciate this episode, so I do think it's really cool. So then we will get into the next episode, of which is Wolf in the Fold. So this is the episode where Scotty hangs out with the stripper because he had an experience that made him hate all women, and Kirk was trying to convince him not to hate all women. I don't remember. I don't really know how that goes. Anyway, so she's murdered, and Scotty's framed. So we have, I was going to say our first, but no, we had court-martial. So this is like another one, and maybe we had more than one, wrongfully accused, which is a trope that Star Trek will do again and again and again and again. And this is one of the dumbest examples, one of the worst examples of the wrongfully accused trope. In my opinion, it's definitely worse than the court-martial, because it turns out that the actual murder, and they have all these different suspects. Oh, you bring in these one-note characters, like, oh, was it him that did it? Oh, who's the murderer? Where it turns out that it's actually Jack the Ripper. Now, whenever they bring, I mentioned this before, like in Babylon 5 review, because they brought Jack the Ripper for Babylon 5. Whenever they bring Jack the Ripper as a, like, supernatural or alien being, I find it like the dumbest fucking thing ever. Like, it's just some rich guy who society was aristocrat that the society didn't want to know that he was the one who was the murderer, so that's why he got away with the murders. He wasn't supernatural. You know, and it's funny, at one stage during the trial, Kirk is like, list all the, you know, times where women have been murdered, and the computer lists like 5 examples throughout like 200, 300 years. Unfortunately, there's a whole lot more examples than that. The computer would be rambling on forever. But anyways, so it just so happens to fit with this, and it's an alien that feeds off of fear, and so it runs around the ship going, ah, in a really high-pitched voice going, ah, I'm gonna kill you, I'll kill you. It was the dumbest fucking thing I have ever seen. And then although I did kind of appreciate the fact they all got like drugged up and as hell, where they were just like, oh, laughing at it. That was kind of funny in a really cheesy, campy way. So, but it doesn't save this episode from totally sucking, which it does. What a bad episode. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is The Changeling. Now, I love this episode. I still love this episode. I think it's an underrated episode. I mean, it's got some love. I do love how a lot of people refer to Star Trek the Motion Picture as where Nomad has gone before, because it's kind of just a ripoff of this episode. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, it's not exactly a ripoff. They do different things. Sure. I mean, obviously, they have different characters, different situations. But it's basically this episode just dressed up wearing different clothes, basically. And so it is a ripoff. And because it's nowhere near as good, they made a movie that's not as good as this episode. And they tried to copy it, and it doesn't work. So I love this episode. I think, so this is when they had the probe Nomad, was going around destroying planets, and was about to destroy the Enterprise until Kirk introduced himself, and he was like, oh, you're my creator, because it was created by a human named Roy Kirk, and you find out the origin is that it was a probe from Earth that went out into deep space, like Voyager 6, Voyager. Anyway, see, they ripped it off. And anyway, but it's a probe that went out to space, Nomad, that got combined with this alien, agricultural probe that was all about sterilizing. So Nomad's mission was to seek out all life, and other probe's mission was to sterilize things that weren't perfect. So they translated that to seeking out all life and sterilizing them if it's not perfect. And I actually like that concept. I think it's really interesting. And more to the point, like, I find this episode one of the most creepiest, most suspenseful episodes. Like, the whole episode is like high tension, where you have this killing machine that's capable of destroying planets just floating around the Enterprise, and of course it randomly kills red shirts whenever they get in his way. And of course, if Kirk didn't play his cards right, it was on the path straight to Earth to kill everyone, to wipe out all life on Earth. And this is, to me, one of the more interesting Earth is in danger episodes in the entire Star Trek franchise, because a lot of times I think they kind of mishandle that. They kind of think, oh, we'll put Earth in danger and that's enough stakes. No, it's not. You still have to transcribe that. Like, for example, Star Trek the original series, where Voyager's going to destroy Earth, no one seems to care, and you don't really have that. You don't feel the high tension like the way you do in this episode, and the way this episode earns it more with everyone being on edge. You can feel the high tension, that they're terrified of this thing, and you see it randomly freaking just wipe out and vaporize any red shirt that gets in its way. It is like so creepy. I think it's one of the most effective episodes. Now, and then you have the end where Kirk logics a robot to death, and I talked about this, and like he did that several times, and was that one Return to the Archons, and later he'll do that again in I Mud, where both of those other examples I think are really stupid, because that's not how computers work. You can't just give them a logic problem that they can't solve and they'll just explode. Like, I guess, computers were different in the 60s, but that's not how computers work, and especially intelligent life. You can't just be like, oh, I'm acting all weird, and then, I'll get to that. But anyway, I actually bought the way Kirk did it here. It actually makes sense. Where those other ones were just like stupid. I'll give you a logic problem you can't solve, and it'll self-destruct, which is stupid. But here, it makes a lot more sense, because Nomad's program is to sterilize all life that's not perfect, all things that are imperfect, which is, of course, a really ridiculous, this is due to a malfunction, and so it's a ridiculously high standard, because no one's perfect, nothing's perfect. And so Kirk outwits it and shows Nomad how he's not perfect by saying, and I love this, one of my favorite moments of the original series, one of my favorite Shatner moments, where Kirk is like, so I'm Kirk, I'm the creator, and Nomad's like, yes, you are the creator, and he says, you're wrong! I'm not the creator, I'm James Kirk, your creator was Roy Kirk, he died 200 years ago, and you failed to correct this mistake? and he kept like drilling it and saying that so it's proving to him that he's imperfect. He's like, you made another mistake by not sterilizing yourself. And then you see that Nomad started going, error, error. And then you had that suspenseful music, the dun, 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 dun. Like, everything about that just works so well to me. And I bought it. Like, I buy that logic into death because his program is to sterilize it in life. It's imperfect. And Kirk just proved that he himself is imperfect. And so it's a conscience of error. So his program, at one point, his program is telling him to sterilize himself. And the other point is his program is saying that he's perfect, needs to survive. And it's like combating and going to overload and explode. And I love it. I love it. It's the only case of the logicking thing to death. We also have guilt tripping a machine to death later, that he does an ultimate computer later on this season. But this is the only case that actually works for me. And it's just a super intense episode, too. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get into the next episode, which is the apple. It's like, okay, so we get A Mock Time Doomsday Machine, both amazing episodes. Then Wolf in the Fold, shitty episode. Changeling, amazing episode. Then we gotta go another shitty episode. And then we're gonna go in another amazing episode. Well, they just like, that's season 2 is like, yee. Anyway, yeah, this episode is terrible. I did a review for this once because someone requested, because I also put this episode in my top 5 worst of the original series. And honestly, I don't know if it will make it. Maybe this time, when I do it, maybe it'll make my top 10 worst. Definitely top 15. But probably not top 5. This is the ultimate Red Shirt episode, where Red Shirt gets killed in the most ridiculous way. Red Shirt gets shot by a flower, and it gets hit, steps on exploding rocks. And what else is that? Lightning? Lightning strikes her. And then, my absolute favorite is when one of the natives just hit the shoulder with the stick, and that kills it. Getting hit in the shoulder by a stick will apparently kill you. What? Yeah, I didn't read that medical book. So, and I hate Red Shirt deaths. There's a reason why, because sometimes Kirk, he kind of acts like he cares, but I don't know. Most of the time they don't. They act like he doesn't care. And I love that line from Lost where Boone was explaining to Locke how Star Trek worked, where the captain would beam down to a planet with the guy with pointy ears and a bunch of no-name people in red shirts, and the red shirt peoples would get killed. And then Locke said, well, that sounds like a piss poor captain to me. Which I can't disagree with him there. So that red shirt trip really bothers the fuck out of me. It's just a cheap way for the writers to raise the stakes by, these people are dying, but no one actually cares. And the way that they just kill off all the ridiculous red shirts in ridiculous ways, I can't get over. And Chekhov, having that romance with the girl is very cheesy. In Russia. I don't know. And, Kirk was the biggest fucking hypocrite, too. He's like, Chekhov, stop doing your hormones. I'm like, my God, what a fucking hypocrite, Kirk. Go fuck yourself, really. Anyway, and then it was the giant machine. And then I said that the aliens looked like sunburnt Californians, and they looked really cheesy too. I was like, just draw them some surfboards and they'll be all good. And then there was a giant reptile-looking alien. There was a supercomputer again. It's just the same thing they did in Return of Archons, but worse. One of the worst episodes for sure. It's terrible. Anyway. Let's go ahead and get into, we'll go to an amazing episode again, back and forth, zigzag. Mirror, Mirror. Of course, a classic, and a classic for very good reason. It is, what I like, it has the evil versions of the crew, which of course is a gimmick, but it is interesting And I do see them as like different versions of Kirk. Like this is Kirk, this is Chekhov. The way their lives would have gone if history had gone a little differently. And I think Deep Space Nine explored this even more to more complexity. It wasn't just like evil counterparts. But it was interesting seeing the evil counterparts, and it was super, super intense. Like again, you had this high feeling of like Kirk O'Hara and Scotty and McCoy, and I love that they use O'Hara and Scotty. Like I love episodes like this where they showcase O'Hara and other characters like that more. Where they're kind of stuck in this like really fucked up bizarre world, and they're just trying to get out of it. It's like really, really intense. I think what hurts, I still give it a 9, even though I almost gave it an 8, because I think what really hurts this episode is the romance thing with the hooker of the week or whatever, the captain's woman. That was a bit cheesy, but not too terrible. So it was still, as I said, I still think it's classic. It's still super intense. So yes, I still love this episode. So we then come to the next episode, The Deadly Gears. Now this is a high concept episode, something that appealed to me more when I was a teenager. It's like, a very simple concept. The crew grow old, they get a disease and they grow old and they become old people. So I kind of liked this more when I was younger. However, I more of just like the concept of it. Like the actual episode is kind of boring. It focuses more on this attempt to relieve Kirk of duty, which I think is kind of a waste of time. Kirk is being a bit obtuse in this episode, and he's being really annoying because you should realize that clearly he does have a disease and that he's not fit for command. And the fact they overplay the fact that he forgets everything and asks the same question twice is really dumb. And they're kind of playing into stereotypes of growing old, but yeah. So I just don't think there was enough story here. So this is why they had to come up with this. And I have more issues with this because Spock. Why didn't Spock take command? He kept refusing to take command. He's like, "Oh, I'm also inflicted by the disease," even though very clearly he's not inflicted as bad as Kirk. But this was done for plot convenience, so this Commodore, who is unrealistically idiotic and incompetent, could take command of the Enterprise. But here's the thing, the whole entire, because Sulu's in this episode, so the whole entire time I'm like, why not give command to Sulu? In fact, the Commodore even says at one time because Kirk, Spock, and Scotty all had the disease, and he's like, well, I'm next in line. Would you rather turn over the command of the ship to one of your junior officers? But Sulu's not a junior officer. Sulu has been in command of the Enterprise multiple times, and he will continue to be in command of the Enterprise in the future. Kirk has left Sulu in command in some really critical situations. There was the arena episode where the Gorn were attacking and Sulu's command. I think there was another episode, I think it was the one where the Klingons were first introduced. What's it called? Errand of Mercy, where they know that the Klingons were attacking. In fact, the Federation was in a state of war with the Klingons, and Sulu was in command of the ship. So don't give me this bullshit about, junior officers, or would you rather me turn over command to you? Because Sulu's very capable of taking command. It was just done for pure plot convenience or contrivance, I should say, so that they had this Commodore who was unrealistically incompetent. I understand he was a paper pusher or whatever, and not really a field commander, and didn't really have much field experience, which is more reason why Sulu should have been given command. But even so, the way he reacts, just goes into the Romulan neutral zone with no plan to deal with them. No, it's totally ridiculous. It's all contrivance so they could set up a terrible situation that we need a good captain in order to get us out of the situation. So Kirk comes in, and this is a callback to the Colburnite maneuver because he brings up the Colburnite thing and the Romulans actually fall for it. Although I am willing to bend on this because the Romulans didn't really fall for it. It just gave them like pause, and then Kirk got the Enterprise out of there while they were confused. Which, okay, I can kind of buy that, but still, I don't know. And the whole plot of this old girlfriend of his being attracted to him just because he's old and she likes older men, and they kind of leave it off the end of the episode ambiguous to whether or not they're actually hooking up. It's a one-off romance, so who cares? Anyway, so this episode wasn't completely terrible, but it's kind of just there. Anyway, let me move over to the next episode, which is I Mud. Now, this is one of 3 attempts I can think of in this season to do a comedy episode. And it's funny because, and I'll talk more about this when get to the other comedy episodes, but I never liked original series comedy. I guess it's like 1960s comedy reminds me of, that's something that kids would watch. Like when I was growing up in the 80s, kids would watch 60s and 70s shows, and it's like childlike humor. I don't know. I don't think it translates, and I did a video once where I did the top 10 funniest episodes of Star Trek, and I didn't include any episodes from the original series, and I got a couple comments complaining. It's like, how can you not include episodes of the original series? I'm like, because I don't find it funny, especially when they're trying to be funny. Maybe I find some of the unintentional humor, such as Enemy Within, where Kirk was supposed to be fighting another version of himself, but clearly it was a stunt double, and they had put like horns on a Cocker Spaniel and called it a weird creature. Like, that shit's funny, but when they tried to be funny, I absolutely do not find it funny. Now, the one good thing I will say about I Mudd in particular is, well, we see the return of Harry Mudd, and the one good thing I will say about it is it's nowhere near as bad as Mudd's women. And that is the highest praise I can give this episode. But I don't like Harry Mudd as a character. I find him annoying, and it's kind of annoying that he's basically the one, I believe the only like reoccurring character, guest character. Now, I'm not talking about like background people like the Saul and people you see in the bridge, whatever. I mean like a main guest, like a main character in an episode who comes, reappears more than once. I mean, within the original series, of course, because, there's always Khan, but that was the movie. Within the original series itself, it was, I think it was just Mudd. And they wanted to bring back Core, but they never did. I believe the animated series brought back Core, and possibly King as well, but the animated series doesn't really count, and plus those characters were voiced by James Doohan anyway. So I wouldn't count that either. Although Harry Mudd, speaking of the animated series, Harry Mudd made a 3rd appearance in that, so it kind of more solidified him as a recurring character, which of course they would bring him back in Discovery. Which I didn't like because I really don't like this character. I never did. Now, the episode itself is not terrible. Like I said, I don't really find it funny because I'm not really into the 60s humor, but it was okay. Like, it was, I don't know, maybe amusing is too strong of a word. It was stimulating. Like, I find it, I wouldn't say funny, like I wouldn't laugh at it, but it was like, it's entertaining, I guess is the better word for the way that they act all silly about these androids. Like, some of the jokes I think were kind of cringy, like when they tried to fake you out to make you think Uhura was actually buying into this Harry Mudd's, the androids thing, and wanting to stay and be immortal, and then Kirk goes up and she's like, tells on the androids, like, oh, they're having this plan, they're trying to deceive you. And then after they leave, Kirk goes up to her, oh, horror! And it sounds like he's gonna like chastise her and yell at everybody. He's like, wonderful job! And I'm like, yeah, I could tell. Like, that fake out was really annoyed the hell out of me. But what annoyed me more, as I mentioned earlier, is the whole how they all logic the androids to death by, well, they don't logic them to death, they basically like silly them to death. Like, they act they say a lot of nonsensical things, and they act nonsense, and like pretend to have a bomb when there's nothing there. And this makes no sense to the android, so it causes them to malfunction and die, which I think is the stupidest thing ever. Like I said, the Nomad thing in the Changeling actually made sense. This is complete nonsense. Like, especially have these complex androids, they won't be like self-destruct just because you start acting silly or saying nonsensical things that contradict things that don't make any sense. That's not how fucking technology works, and even modern technology wouldn't do that, especially have this futuristic high-tech technology. It's not just gonna blow up because you say shit that doesn't make any sense. It's the stupidest thing ever. Anyway, I didn't totally hate this episode. Again, it was fine. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which, if my mouse will start working, I can get to, which is The Trouble with Tribbles. Now, this is another comedy episode, and of course, this is a classic. This is, when I was growing up, I'm not sure if it's still this way, but when I was growing up, this was always like number one on all the top 10s. Every time they have a top 10 episode of original series, this would be number one. And even back then, I was like, that does not deserve to be number one. And it's basically because the whole thing about the tribbles, like, caught on as a cultural thing. Like, people would have, like, pet tribbles, and, oh, they're so cute, and they found this episode amusing. But as I said, I don't really like the comedy. Now, I will say this is probably my favorite comedy episode of the original series, but it didn't make me laugh out loud, and I don't find it that entertaining. Like, I wouldn't call it like the best episode of anything really, and so I think it's a highly overrated episode, which kind of brings it down for me. I always thought this episode was really overrated, but I will say, like, I did like the camaraderie between the crew. I think that was at its height. I think, and even though I didn't find this episode laugh out loud funny, I did find it very witty. Like, I think the dialogue was very smartly written, and it starts out from the beginning of you had this snippy, like, really crisp interaction with the crew that most episodes of the original series don't have. So I can kind of see the appeal to it and why some people like it, and plus it has the furry balls of tribbles. But anyway, and that short trek where they did the tribbles, like, that doesn't exist. That's not canon. That never happened. It's a piece of shit, and fuck that episode. Because I'm bringing it up now because this episode, and again, the animated series kind of fudged this up too, but this episode made it clear that the tribbles live in an environment where they have lots of predators that keep their numbers down, so it's a natural defense that they breed super fast in order to keep the species going, because they have no other, like, protected defenses against the many predators, which makes a ton of sense. And when you take that animal away from that environment where its numbers are kept down, where it's able to exist naturally, when you take it from the environment where it has no predators, then it's just going to breed uncontrollably and become a menace. And then this, I thought, was a very clear, very good statement about, like, removing animals and having pest species, invasive species in other areas or not, and how they take over because they're not in its natural environment. And that stupid short track tried to say it was genetically engineered by some idiot to be a food force source, which, again, that doesn't exist. That's nonsense. That's bullshit. It's not canon. I don't give a fuck when anyone says it. It sucked! Anyway, and even the animated series tried to be like, oh, we created a tribal predator. No, the whole point is they have tons of predators that already exist. Anyway, so that's the one I was saying that as a positive of the episode, because the episode was actually smart, where all the other bullshit that came after tried to fuck it up. Anyway, but here's the thing I don't really buy, that Serena Jones would have this triple, and he didn't seem to realize, like, later in the episode he talked about, oh yeah, they produce really fast. But if he knew that, like, then why did he, like, give it away? Like, he gave it away for free to a horror, thinking, oh, she's gonna show it to our friends and they're all gonna love it and they're gonna want to buy from me. But if he knew how much they reproduce, he would know that wouldn't happen, that it would just reproduce and that everyone who saw it would just take the triples from the ones that reproduce. So him trying to sell was a very bad business strategy. And I know they're trying to say, oh, Serena Jones is an idiot, blah blah blah, but no, like, I don't buy that. And also, how could he have it for that long? Like, he obviously brought it with him to the station, so how could he have it for that long without it reproducing a ridiculous amount? How come he doesn't have a shitload of triples? I mean, you could say if he knew it was reproduced that much, that he would have it in stasis or some shit. But if there's a stasis or whatever that's able to prevent it from reproducing, why didn't they try to use that here in this episode? And also, it's gonna take, like, what they say, something like 15 years for Serena Jones to clear all the triples off, or 11 years or something like that, to clear all the triples off the station. No, it won't. That's bullshit. That's dumb. Anyway, and then we also get the Klingons who are acting like, not like Klingons, and they have Captain Koloth in this episode. And I always remember this interview with the actor who played Koloth, because he appeared in Deep Space Nine as a Klingon, but he was talking about, I think even before his appearance in Deep Space Nine, where, track was a huge thing, and people would come up to him in the street, and they'd be like, oh, say something in Klingon, and he'd be like, my dear Captain Kirk, because he didn't, like, the Klingon language didn't exist until the movies in the Next Gen, so in this episode he wasn't acting like a Klingon. It was just being like, oh, my dear Captain Kirk. And then they had that other Klingon dude who was, like, insulting Scotty, who started the bar fight, who I always like to quote that line, though. It's like, the Enterprise shouldn't be hauling garbage. It should be hauled away as garbage. You notice that he has, like, this kind of Eastern European, a la Russian accent, which is definitely not a coincidence. They're just trying to do a very non-obvious stand-in for Russians, and they're not really, this isn't the Klingons. Like, I would look to Aaron and Mercy that came before this episode and say that they do actually resemble the Klingons that we know and love throughout Trek history, particularly, the movies and TNG, DS9. Whereas the second season Klingons, especially like this, do not resemble them at all. They're just like, oh my dear God. And that kind of annoys me too. So anyway, I do like this episode. I do give it a decent rating, but it is still way overrated. It's not that good. It's not going to appear in never appear in any of my top 10s, let alone top 20s or whatever. Anyway, next episode is Bread and Circuses. I think this episode has the honor of being the first episode of Star Trek I've ever saw. When I was, I don't know how young I was like 9 or 10, maybe 11. It's before I got into Star Trek. At first I didn't like Star Trek because I didn't know much about it. My mom was into it, and I was like, oh, Star Trek sucks, and I never really cared about it until I was like 12 and I saw The Wrath of Khan. But before this, I remember watching, like, we used to have these random videotapes lying around where we'd just tape shit off the TV. And when I was bored, this is what we had to do in the late 80s. We didn't have the internet. When I was bored, I would take some of these tapes and just like scan through them and watch them to see if there was anything interesting on them. And I came across this episode, Bread and Circuses, and I was actually interested in this episode. I was like, hey, this is actually a pretty interesting concept. We got this Roman culture, and Kirk and Spock are trapped, and I was so invested. And then the tape ended right in the middle of the episode, and I never got to see the end of it, and until much later when I didn't really care about it. And then when I finally did see this episode in context, I was like, this isn't so good. This is kind of dumb. And especially now, as an adult, is one of those episodes I talked about is fucking ridiculous, where they go to another planet that's just like Earth, and they just happen to evolve to be the Romans and the Christians or whatever. That's so dumb, and it really annoys me that they, throughout the episode they say to worship the sun worshippers, and then at the end Spock's like, oh, well, I don't understand how it's so primitive, the people who worship the sun, and then Uhura explains, no, it's the Son of God, and like, oh, that makes so much more sense. Why is it so much more primitive and nonsensical to worship the sun than to worship Jesus? Like, I know. I think that's an incredibly biased perspective, and also them making a huge deal about Christianity rising in this 20th century setting is like, I don't know. It bothered me, and plus, like, the most of this episode, it's just like this and two other episodes I'll cover are pretty much the exact same thing. It's a stupid premise. It is not good. It's like they go to this 20th century planet and they get captured and they get beaten and then they escape and I don't know. They don't even change the course of this planet. I don't know. It's just a really... So, 9-year-old or 10-year-old me might have liked this episode, but 42-year-old me definitely thinks this episode sucks. Anyway, we'll get into the next episode, which is Journey to Babel, which is a good episode. This is an episode I actually didn't care for that much. I thought it was overrated when I was a teenager. I do appreciate it more now because I do like it. Does introduce us to a slew of aliens that will be recurring, like the Andorians, the Tellarites, and the Orions. Although the Orions don't really appear that as much. That's more of a more recent thing they started appearing. But, like the Orion Syndicate or whatever. But the, is an interesting concept. And I do believe, definitely get the vibe from this episode that the United Federation of Planets is meant to be more like the United Nations, whereas future incarnations of Trek will portray the United Federation of Planets more like the United States of America, where it's a nation into itself, where this episode kind of portrays it more as an alliance of nations like the United Nations. But whatever. That's fine, especially the way they argue and debate, and they had that Tellarite come up to Sarek and like, oh, where are you voting? Like, and I did find the relationship between Spock and Sarek an interesting one, and I did like how Spock refused to like save Sarek's life when Kirk got injured, because he's like, oh, I have to be in command. And again, he's being obtuse. He could just turn it over to Scotty. Scotty's actually a really great commander. So I think Spock was being obtuse there too, but it was an interesting. I buy it for his character, to be fair, and it was a very interesting plot point. And Kirk had to pretend to be okay to get Spock to volunteer, but then all the shit started going down with Orion, so Kirk decided to stay in in command. Anyway, I do love how they put on the show for Spock, where Kirk is like, "Oh yeah, you can go, Spock. Yeah, I'm all good." And he comes up and then he's like, "Sulu, set a course." And as soon as Spock leaves, he's like, "Oh," slumps down his chair, gets Scotty to the bridge. Like that was kind of cool. Yeah, so overall, I did like this episode. I just have an issue with the fact that Amanda referred to Spock's pet, which apparently is like this vicious saber-toothed tiger, as a teddy bear. That makes absolutely zero sense. Anyway, and then McCoy latched onto that. It's like, a teddy bear? And Spock's like, actually, our teddy bears are alive, and they have 6-inch fangs or something. And then it's not a fucking teddy bear. It's not even remotely close to a teddy bear. But anyway, that just annoyed me. Let's get into the next episode, which is A Private Little War. Now, I've already name dropped this one because I always got this episode confused with Friday's Child. And I had to actually watch it to see what happened, because I don't remember what happens in it, because these are very forgettable Western-esque episodes, which is supposed to be like a Vietnam analogy. This one, actually watching it very, very clearly, is supposed to be a Vietnam analogy, and it does a terrible job at it. And there's so many episodes, and it's particularly in season 2, where they bring up the Prime Directive. They bring up the Prime Directive a lot more in season 2 than they did in season 1, and it becomes a major plot point for a lot of episodes. But then you have episodes like this where they don't give a fuck about the Prime Directive, and they just like actively interfere with totally undeveloped pre-warp cultures. And in fact, they shouldn't be interacting with them at all. Yet Kirk has this pre-existing relationship with this tribesman dude, and it was like they were old friends or whatever. And I don't know. And then they had this crazy, witch woman or whatever, sorcerer or whatever, who heals Kirk by doing like this weird chanting, which I thought was really stupid. And then this is like one of several examples this season where they have implied rape, which it seems it's unnecessary, and also it's really disturbing that they just like to casually have this implied rape. Because the woman tries to take the phaser to their enemies, which throughout the whole episode she's like, we need to kill these people, they're active enemies, we need to attack them. And then all of a sudden she's like, oh, let me defect to them and give them these weapons because the other guys are pissing me off. It's an unrealistic character turn, and I don't buy that they would thank her by trying to rape her or whatever. It's just, I don't know. And then they had this was introduced as Magatu things, which is just a guy in a college mascot uniform going grrr. And they appeared in Lower Decks, and I was like, I don't. This is a callback I don't need because this episode sucks. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is The Gamesters of Triskelion. Now, this is an episode I did really like when I was a teenager, but now, it's okay. They bring back the whole music. In fact, this is the episode I always associated this music with growing up. It wasn't until later that I realized it's actually first introduced in Amok Time, which is a much better episode. Because this, Kirk, Uhura, and Chekhov, and I do appreciate the using the lesser characters like Chekhov and Uhura. They're supposed to beam down, they get snatched away to this other planet to be fighting an arena. It's a very sort of simple, straightforward. I don't know, I think watching season 2, binge watching it, I just get sick of our main characters getting abducted. And now makes me realize why Enterprise always went back to that same well over and over again, where the main characters would get abducted and tortured or whatever, because that's what the original series did. And I guess I never realized that. And they're forced into slavery, and they're forced to fight, and Kirk tries to rebel, and they're tortured and punished every time they try to rebel. And then this is an even worse example of implied sexual assault, where we have the Uhura is in a cell, and this guy says her drill thought comes in. He's obviously, they show it in shadows, but he's obviously like trying to rape her, and Kirk is like yelling, "What's going on with Lieutenant Uhura?" And then we cut to commercial break, and all of a sudden everything's fine, and he's leaving, and Uhura kicked him out, and everything's okay now. Like, that's terrible. Like, that actively pisses me off. Like, that's a cheap way to do it, and the fact that everything's just magically fine like that pisses me off. Anyway, I mean, not that it should have happened in the first place, but it just makes the whole thing totally unnecessary, and I don't know. Anywho, like, in the whole romance with Kirk, like, trying to woo this woman and being like, "Do you know what beautiful is? You're beautiful." Like, that was cheesy as fuck. This is one of the more cheesy romance of the weeks. But of course you gotta love the whole 100 quatlus on the newcomer. like that was kind of funny. Although it's hard for me to buy again that these super evolved aliens that are just like brains would bother themselves with running these like arena type fighting games and betting on them. Seems like they should have better things to entertain themselves with. But anyway, yeah, and also it has a side plot where Scotty and McCoy are being very, very obtuse and annoying to Spock. And because Spock, they searched the whole area, and they couldn't find the captain. Clearly they're not there, so Spock finds like a trace of the transporter beam that actually being the way, so he's following it. And the whole entire time McCoy is just nagging and bothering Spock and being like, "Spock, why are you taking us on wild goose chase?" And then Scotty's agreeing with McCoy and being like, "Yeah, you're wasting our time, blah, blah, blah." And it's like, they're being so annoying, like, and Spock even points out, like, what is the harm of following this lead? It could lead us to the captain, and if it doesn't, then we could always just go back to the planet. Like, why is McCoy being such an asshole about this? That whole subplot annoys the hell out of me. But, I still like this episode. As I said, I still get enjoyment over the whole arena fight thing, and Kirk fighting for, Uhura and Chekhov. Although the fact that it all ends with them having everything depending on whether or not Kirk can like beat these three people is like, yeah. And they say it's like a fight to the death. Like, the only way you can win is by killing your opponent, and yet what's her face yields, and all of a sudden they're okay with that. Oh, that's fine if she yields. Anyway, but it's a decent episode. So then we get to the next episode, which is Obsession, and I would say I never liked this episode, but I also never really knew what happened. Like, I don't know. I think when I first watched it, we taped it off the TV. I think we missed the first 10 minutes of it, and so I was a little, or at least the first 5 minutes, and so I was a little lost what it was about. So, and I hadn't really, like, I didn't really remember what, I don't think I've ever watched this episode, like, from start to finish, paying very close attention to it. I didn't really remember what it was about, other than there's some gaseous cloud off killing people that Kirk becomes obsessed with finding and catching. So I watched it. It was probably the first time that I ever like just sat down, watched the whole episode, paid very close attention from start to finish. And I can see why. Maybe I had seen it before, I just don't remember it, because this is an extremely forgettable episode. It is it's like, the way Kirk is, I don't buy this for Kirk's character at all, the way he sort of becomes obsessed with this weird cloud thingy. And then they throw in some random red shirt security officer and try to make him like a character. Yeah, I don't really care about him, and it's because Kirk knew his father or something. At the end of the episode, it's like, oh, let me tell you about your dad. Like, the whole backstory for this was done so poorly and like so quickly that I had like zero attachment to it. I had no attachment to the stupid cloud thingy that was killing people. I had no attachment to Kirk's quest to find it. It's just I think it was a very poorly constructed story that just did not do a good job of getting me invested in the story in any way, shape, or form, nor did I particularly buy any of the character stories. Like, I didn't care about the stupid ensign. I didn't buy Kirk's behavior in this episode. It was just a very forgettable, poorly done. Like, it's not terrible. It doesn't make me think, like, oh, this is a very shitty episode like some other certain episodes, but it's just very forgettable. It's just very ordinary and very bland. So, yeah, that's all I gotta say about that one. So then we move over to the next episode, which is the immunity syndrome. Now, this is an episode I do remember, and I always hated this episode. It always gave me a headache watching it. I guess because it has that loud, high-pitched sound every time the Enterprise gets like close to the anomaly. They hear this whee, and I think that gives me a headache every time I watch this episode. And plus, the whole episode is about like a giant amoeba forming in the galaxy and trying to take over the universe. Yeah, again, similar to the hand grabbing the Enterprise, this is another thing I always point out when people complain about how ridiculous the alternative factor is. I'm like, okay, alright, so that's ridiculous and nonsensical science, but a giant amoeba appearing out of nowhere and trying to eat the galaxy, you're perfectly happy with that? Like, this is way worse! Way worse! It's a bunch of stupid nonsense, and the episode itself is like really boring. Well, I will say the way it begins is actually kind of interesting, but then once they reveal the amoeba, that's when the whole episode just plummets. Because it actually reminded me a lot of Season 4 of Discovery with the DMA, because there's this weird, powerful anomaly that ate a planet, and they have no idea what it is. They have no knowledge, and all this weird stuff is happening to them when they try to investigate. So that part of it I was kind of with, but then as soon as they revealed it was a giant amoeba, that's when I was like, that's so stupid. and then Kirk and McCoy, not Kirk, Spock and McCoy argue over which one of them gets to die and sacrifice himself. Like, that's a plot like I was not interested in and didn't really care. And then Spock was out in the shuttlecraft, like, lying around. Looks like I knew they'd rescue him, and it's just like, and they were flying around inside a giant amoeba. It's so dumb. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is a piece of the action. Now, this is a fan favorite episode that a lot of people always talked about. This also always made the top 10 best, and everyone always praised about this episode. And I never liked it. Never did. Now, part of this is because I just am not a fan of the mobster genre. I'm just not. I never got into any of the mob movies or anything like that. I don't know, for whatever reason, I just have no interest in it whatsoever. And this is another one of those episodes I mentioned. It's a comedy episode. Now, again, like, the comedy is okay. Like, I wouldn't describe it as terrible, but again, not laugh out loud funny. And some of the camaraderie between Kirk and Spock works for me, but some of it is very sort of obvious, like the way when they try to act like gangsters and Kirk puts on this action, yeah, I'm taking over, see? Like, that's kind of, I didn't like that. That annoys me. But some of the camaraderie, like the interaction between Kirk and Spock, where they're kind of fucking up and being like, he's saying right, and right, Spock, and he's like, right, and then he says check, and then he says right, and he says check and right at the wrong time or whatever. Like, that's okay. Like, Kirk, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy do have good on-screen chemistry, and that does show off in this episode. But the whole concept, again, this is another just like freaking Breads and Circuses and Patterns of Force, which I'll get into. This is another, like, they go to a planet that is just like 20th century Earth. Now, here they come up with some contrived BS excuse that an Earth ship came there earlier and left this book behind about not mobsters, and the whole culture decided to to model their entire culture off of a book. Now, how they could get such minute detail right to reproduce 1930s Chicago gangsters or mobsters perfectly from a book, well, that's just nonsense, isn't it? It's just a BS excuse to have, oh, it wouldn't be cool to have Kirk and Spock running around as Chicago gangsters, because that was a popular genre, I'm sure, at the time. And it's dumb. I never liked that concept. I always thought it was dumb. Now, I don't hate this episode. Again, it's entertaining, like the way Kirk has to round up all the gangsters, even though I do find some of the humor annoying. Some of it actually is cute and works. So it's ultimately okay, but it's definitely not a great episode like a lot of people claim it to be. Anyway, we're getting to the next episode, which is By Any Other Name. Now, this is an episode I think I would call highly underrated. I never heard of this episode. I still barely hear anyone talk about it, and I actually think it's a really good episode. These aliens from the galaxy show up to conquer the Federation or the Alpha Quadrant or whatever, conquer the galaxy, of course, because they're not using terms like the Alpha Quadrant yet. That's not made up until like TNG or DS9. But anyway, they come over to conquer, and they take over the Enterprise, and they turn like people into these cubes, and they have like this, they're really overpowering the Enterprise. Every time Kirk tries to fight back, they just press a button on the belt that like instantly freezes them, and they're stuck and they can't do anything. It has that really intense, like, sort of helpless feeling, and you put yourself in Kirk's shoes. Now, granted, yes, once again, Kirk and his crew are being abducted and tortured, whatever. They're going back to that well a bit too much in season 2, but this is one of the better examples, in my opinion, because I found it is a really creepy, like, it has this really, more than just high tension, but really like horrific, like creepy vibes, where they can instantly turn a person into like this cube that, and then they crush it, and they actually just kill a woman by doing that, and then they take the other cube and really turn it back into the person. Like that scene, like, that is a very, very horrific scene, in my opinion. It's a very effective horror scene that creeps me the fuck out. And I do actually kind of like that they were completely overpowered by them, and every time they tried to stop them, like they tried to blow up the ship. But the aliens caught them because they're just so much technologically superior to them. There's just no stopping them that way, and the only way that they're able to stop them is to appeal to their emotions, because they're not used to being in human form. They're not used to having emotions, so they play off of that. And I absolutely love that one of the aliens is defeated by Scotty drinking him under the table. That's actually effective humor for me, I suppose. But yeah, I fucking love that. and then they, of course the whole thing, Kirk has to kiss a woman, create a love triangle, because of course he does. But it is interesting that they can't defeat them through superior tactics or technology or force, that the only way they're doing it is to appeal to their emotions and then make them realize that this plan isn't going to work, and so they turn around and they're like, oh, we'll peacefully colonize the planet. We're all friends now. Who cares that you killed one of my ensigns and tried to threaten to kill all of us and take over the ship? We're all buddies now. Whatever. But anyway, yeah, I did really like that episode. I think it's a little underrated. So then we get into the next episode, which is Return to Tomorrow. Oh, sorry. So this is another episode I never really heard of, and with good reason. It is very unremarkable. It is very boring. I just find this episode so boring. Like, they go to this planet, and there's this, voice in the head talking, "All my children, you have returned," and his voice always echoes and reverberates when he talks. And they want to take over Kirk's body, Spock's body, and Dr. Pulaski's body, and they take it over. And then, of course, the guy who takes over Spock's body turns out to be this evil guy who wants to keep Spock's body and kill the guy inhabiting Kirk, Sargon or whatever, and but Sargon, of course, is very smart and outwits them, no, okay. Anyway, not the worst episode in the world, but it's not good. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is Patterns of Force. Nazis in space! Nazis? Really? Really? They're gonna do Nazis and they go to an alien planet, and there's a historian from the Federation who's supposed to be just a cultural observer, but he had the brilliant idea to turn them into Nazis, because Nazis were one of the most efficient forces in history. And yet, they're surprised when these Nazis turn out to commit genocide against a different race and consider themselves the superior race and be all racist and commit genocide and start war. Yeah, you would never... Nazis doing that? Really? What a shock. It's so dumb! Like, it's just an excuse. Like, Star Trek, to be fair, Star Trek will continue to use dumb excuses to include Nazis, such as the episode Killing Game and Voyager, and the that two-part episode of Enterprise where they go back to an alternate Nazi future when they take over America. What was that episode even called? I don't even remember. Who cares? But, yeah, but this is the worst of it, actually. This is the worst example. And they refuse to show this episode in Germany, which I can't really fault them for, because there's really they're being really flippant with their use of Nazis, and it doesn't make any sense that there be Nazis on this alien planet. And it's so dumb that this historian would actually try to introduce it into the, like, it's, oh, they're efficient. Like, no, try again. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of other cultures throughout history that were efficient that does not have the brutality attached to it as the same as Nazi Germany. And it's just, oh my god. It's just, what the hell with their Reddit? They're lazy. That's what they were thinking. They're lazy. It's like, I don't know. Let's just have them go to a planet where there's Nazis. Oh my god. They even have, like, it's not even their like space Nazis. They are Nazis. They have freaking the uniforms with the swastika on it. Like, what the hell is wrong with you, writers? What is wrong with you? Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is The Ultimate Computer. Now, I did a full-length review for this episode shortly before I started my watching Season 2 for this video, so I didn't re-watch this episode because I had already just seen it. I like this episode despite its flaws. I think it's a really interesting concept. Supercomputer taking over the Enterprise and investing war games, and then the computer, of course, ends up going crazy and starts killing the other ships. It does have some flaws, like they hammer in the political point that, machines shouldn't take people's jobs. Like, we get it, yes. And the fact that the Commodore in this episode is a total asshole to Kirk, and he's an idiot who thinks, Kirk, why are you attacking us? And he just completely, forgets that there's a supercomputer that's controlling the Enterprise. Totally forgets about that and goes straight to blaming Kirk. What an asshole. So, yes, it has flaws, but I did like the character sort of examination of Daystrom. I think that was actually worked for me. So, I despite itself, I did kind of like this episode. So, and then, it's funny, okay, so, as I mentioned, I had already watched The Ultimate Computer before I started the rewatch for this season, so I skipped over it. So I got to a point where I was like, oh, I'm almost through season 2, because I was very late making this video, and I was like trying my hardest to get through season 2 so I could make this video. And I was like, oh, thank God, I only got 3 episodes of the original series left. And then I looked to see, well, what 3 episodes do I have left to watch? Patterns of Force, The Omega Glory, and Assignment Earth. And I was like, oh my God, I gotta sit through that crap. And yeah, so it was not. Season 2 ends on a very low note. It was not for the inclusion of the Ultimate Computer. I would say that the whole end of season 2 sucks. But I had already watched it, so I had to skip over the good episode and watch the 3 shit episodes in a row. Alright, so The Omega Glory. Very notorious for being a terrible episode and one of the worst episodes of the original series. I don't know if I met anyone who argued that this episode is actually really good. However, here's the thing I noticed watching this episode. Which I had this impression from my memory of watching this episode before that this might be the case, but it's kind of really solidified for me on this rewatch, is that this episode was actually a good episode up until 10 minutes before it ended. So up until 10 minutes before it ended, it was actually a really intense, creepy episode where, like, they go aboard they find this other Starfleet ship and over this planet that's abandoned, and they go there and they find like uniforms lying around with like dust around it, and they're like, what's the deal with this? And I don't know why Seinfeld's beamed on the away team, but whatever. But anyway, they find out that it was actually the dust or whatever was actually people. That's their bodies, that they caught this disease that killed them all off. So that's a really creepy premise. But then we find out that the captain escaped by going to the planet. So Kirk and his landing party go to the planet to try, and the red shirt gets killed immediately. Of course he does. But anyway, they go there to try to figure out what's going on with because they feel like it's the only place they can go to try to cure this disease, that if they stay on the ship they'll die. And they find that like there's this war going on between these 2 factions that live on the planet, the Coms and the Yangs. And the Yangs seem to be very primitive, barbaric people who keep attacking the more civilized Yangs. And the captain is from the other ship aligned himself with the Yangs, and at first everything seems to be okay, but then you realize that this captain's like thinks that he found the fountain of youth, because these the people who live on the planet like age very slowly, and some have been alive for like almost 1,000 years. So he's like becomes obsessed, and you find out that he's basically becomes like the evil captain stereotype. Now, it does kind of annoy me that a lot of the other Starfleet captains, again, this is kind of the same plot as Patterns of Force and Bread and Circuses, where there's this, and even you could even kind of say a piece of the action, but not really, but where there's another like Starfleet or Federation guy who goes to the planet, and well, in those cases they made it a lot more like Earth, but here it's already happened to be like Earth, but I haven't gotten that part yet. But the part where Starfleet captains seem to be really easily corrupted and can turn into villains very easily, that part is a bit annoying to me. But anyway, it's still a very intense episode. It's still very interesting. It had that creepy vibe for it at first. Like they turn into powder, or then they're stuck in between this war where there's barbarians trying to kill them. Kirk tries to make an alliance with the Yangs, but they don't care, and they just try to beat them down anyway. So, and then the Kirk, ends up having this firefight with the other captain where they're trying to, because he realizes the captain wants to kill them all. And McCoy even finds out that the Fountain of Youth thing is bullshit, and he actually finds out that they're already built an immunity from the disease just by being on the planet, and had everyone on the crew just stayed on the planet a little bit longer, they would all still be alive too, which adds a sense of tragedy. So you have me so far. So far, this is like a really interesting, really intense episode. It has its flaws, of course, but then you get into the last act of the episode where they completely torpedo it and ruin the entire episode and make it one of the worst episodes of the original series. Where they have to say that the Yangs are really the Yanks and the Yankees, and this is like really just another Earth where, as a post-apocalyptic version, where the communists and the United States fought and created nuclear war, and then years in the future, they happen to have the exact same Constitution of the United States. They happen to have an American flag. And then they have Kirk make his stupid speech about we the people is such an important patriotism, blah, blah, blah. Which to me kind of goes against what Star Trek is. It's kind of about, it's not about like patriotic chest thumping, but I guess like the network just couldn't help themselves. Not saying that Roddenberry wasn't all for this, I'm sure he was, but anyway, so yeah, that's the dumbest thing ever. So it was a good episode. It seems like, I feel like the writers like had this good episode, but then another writer or studio interference like threw in this bullshit about, hey, let's make this be about like Yankees versus communists or whatever, and let's have this American chest bumping, reading, showing the American flag, and Kirk like spouting out the Declaration of Independence. This is the dumbest thing ever. They're on an alien planet. So it was a good episode that was completely ruined by its last 10 minutes, and so it makes it a shitty episode. Anyway, speaking of shitty episodes, let's get into the final episode of Season 2, Assignment Earth. So this episode begins with the captain's log of Kirk saying, oh, we're in 20th century, we traveled back in time for historical research. No you didn't. Like, why would you do this? Like, no, you didn't. You did not do this. Why the fuck would the Enterprise purposely just casually go back to the 20th century and hang out where we could interfere or fuck things up or dilute the timeline, but we're just going to do it for the fuck of it. We want to figure out how the Earth managed to survive the nuclear crisis in the 1960s, as if that was the only terrible crisis Earth has ever had. Now, granted, I think there have been some name drops of World War III even at this stage in Star Trek, although it wasn't solidified to exactly what it was until much later, I think, Next Generation. But looking back on it, you gotta say that was probably a much worse, except because that was an actual nuclear holocaust rather than an almost like nuclear holocaust. So why didn't he go back and study that? But why would they go back in the past to just hang out and study Earth? Like, that is the dumb. I immediately reject that premise with full force. But of course, we know that the whole reason that was done was plot contrivance, because Roddenberry would like to pitch an idea for another stupid show he wants to do. Now, this show looks very stupid on its own. Which is basically is a Mission Impossible with aliens. Basically, it's about this, humans who were taken from Earth thousands of years ago, raised on another planet, and now they're sent back to Earth to try to bring peace or prevent humanity from destroying itself. And it has this guy who looks like, James Bond or whatever, with a cat who actually is kind of a woman, and he has this quirky secretary. And then the episode becomes all about that. And then Kirk and Spock will cameo in it occasionally. And really, Kirk and Spock serve no storytelling purposes in this episode. They're just there to, basically, they just interfere and fuck things up and get in the way. And it's all about Gary Seven, how awesome he is, and how he's gonna, because Roddenberry's like, please, pitching his idea, please NBC, pick up this show. It was a very insidious way of trying to do a backdoor. It does show how Roddenberry is kind of a shady individual. And it's a stupid idea. Like, as I said, it's no wonder that NBC didn't pick it up, because it's a dumb idea. And they wasted the Star Trek episode on it just because so Ryan May would have some cheap way to try to pitch the networks, because obviously they're probably smart enough not to make a pilot for this stupid episode. So he tried to make it sneak in a pilot in Star Trek and just throw in Kirk and Spock in the background every once in a while. And it's so boring. Like, we just see Kirk and Spock, like, they get abducted by this military base, and they're sitting there in the control room, and they're just standing there every once in a while. We see them for like 5 minutes just standing around watching everyone operating their controls, and we see everyone operating the controls for 5 minutes, and it's drawn out, very long, very boring, and it's totally not interesting. And I suppose like the character of Gary Seven was tinged interesting with his, Terry Garr plays the secretary, and he had this cat or whatever, but like, this is an episode of Star Trek. Why the fuck? And it's just like they just hijacked this episode of Star Trek to do a stupid pilot for a stupid idea that should never be picked up. It was very insidious. I'm very much against it. So that's it. That's all the episodes of season 2 of the original series. So now, as I always do, I'll name my least favorite and my favorite episode of season 2. As for my least favorite episode, well, quite frankly, as I mentioned, there are a lot of contenders. There were Friday's Child, The Immunity Syndrome, A Private Little War, Patterns of Force, Wolf in the Fold, Assignment Earth, and Cat's Paw as a very close second place. But as for the worst episode of season 2, which is I don't know, it's quite a bold title. I'm going to give that to The Apple. The ultimate let's kill off all the red shirts for no good reason in the most ridiculous, silly ways, and have Kirk be a total hypocrite and have this just regurgitate plots from previous episodes, but in a more half-assed, less interesting way. Just a terrible episode all around. So, as for best episode of season 2, contenders for this are By Any Other Name, Journey to Babel, The Doomsday Machine, Amok Time, and Mirror Mirror. But in a very controversial move, I am going to name the best episode for season 2, The Changeling. I know it's not the fan favorite. That would be Journey to Babel or Mirror Mirror or Amok Time. Or the Doomsday Machine, but really, like, the Changeling is the one I really like the most. As I said, I think that was the most sort of intense, like, high tension, like, had me on the edge of my seat and sort of feeling really, like, yeah, uncomfortable in a good way throughout most of the episode. And so I think it's one of the most effective episodes of the original series. So that is my pick for best episode of season 2. Now, as for my rating for season 2 of Star Trek: The Original Series as a whole, out of 10, I'm going to give season 2 a 6. Good. Because, now, we do have some really good episodes, like, the ones I just mentioned. But other than that, like, I'm looking over the ratings, there's a few okay episodes like Trouble with Tribbles and Ultimate Computer. And Metamorphosis, I said, was okay. But the majority of the episodes are just bad. They just have a poor rating. They're either boring or rely on 20th century nonsense or just outright stupid like Wolf in the Fold. Or like have a giant amoeba try to take over the galaxy, some other bullshit. So, yeah, I gotta say the majority of the season was not good. Now, it does get a positive rating of a 6 because it does have a lot of great episodes in it, and overall introduces Chekhov and has some great character interactions throughout the season. But more often than not, I think the writers failed, honestly. So, yeah, so 6 out of 10. So that is it for my review of Season 2 of Star Trek: The Original Series. I shall be back next month to cover Season 3. We'll see if I think it's better and worse than season 2. We'll see. In the meantime, you can check out my channel as I cover many more Star Trek videos, as well as covering other shows such as Star Wars, Clone Wars, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks so much for watching.